The dust from her father's boot still clung to the back of her dress where he had shoved her through the doorway. And Maeve Garrison stumbled down the dirt road of Lincoln, Nebraska, with nowhere to go and a secret growing inside her that had cost her everything. The August sun beat down mercilessly on this day in 1878, and she clutched her small bundle of belongings, watching through tear-blurred eyes as the only home she had ever known disappeared behind her. Her father's final words echoed in her mind, each syllable a knife to her heart. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child under my roof." She was 19 years old, 3 months pregnant, and utterly alone in a world that had no patience for fallen women. The main street of Lincoln stretched before her, lined with false-fronted buildings and the curious stares of townspeople who had already heard the news. Shame burned through her chest, but she kept her chin up as best she could, though her hands trembled violently. The father of her child had been a smooth, talking salesman who had passed through town in May, filling her head with promises of marriage and a life beyond the confines of her strict household. He had vanished before she even realized she was carrying his child, leaving nothing but a broken heart and consequences she would bear alone. Maeve made it to the edge of town before her legs gave out, and she sank onto a wooden bench outside the telegraph office, fighting the nausea that had plagued her for weeks. The afternoon heat was stifling, and she had no money, no prospects, and no family willing to claim her. Her mother had cried silently while her father raged, but neither had stood up for her when he made his decree. Her 2 brothers had looked away, unable or unwilling to challenge their father's authority. She was truly on her own. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made her look up, and she saw a rider coming down the street on a sturdy bay horse. The man sat tall in the saddle, wearing a well-worn hat that shaded his face from the sun. He slowed as he passed, and she caught a glimpse of dark eyes beneath the brim, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. For a moment she thought he might stop, but he continued on toward the general store, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. She tried not to stare, but there was something about him that drew her attention. He was probably in his mid-20s, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man accustomed to hard physical work. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, his boots scuffed from long days in the stirrups. He tied his horse to the hitching post and disappeared into the store, leaving Maeve alone with her spiraling thoughts once more. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. She watched wagons roll by, listened to the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer, and tried to formulate some kind of plan. She could try to find work, but who would hire a pregnant woman with no references and a reputation in tatters? The boarding house would not take her without money up front, and she had exactly 12 cents to her name. The reality of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she felt the prick of tears again, though she fought them back stubbornly. The cowboy emerged from the general store carrying a sack of supplies, and this time he walked directly toward her. Maeve stiffened, uncertain whether to flee or hold her ground. Up close, she could see that his face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and sun-weathered skin that spoke of countless days working outdoors. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat, and those eyes, deep brown and penetrating, seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained composure. "You are the Garrison girl," he said, and it was not a question. His voice was low and steady, with a hint of something she could not quite place in the accent. Not the sharp consonants of the East, but something softer, perhaps Southern. She nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. Finally she managed, "Maeve Garrison. Though I suppose I am just Maeve now." "Zachary Xanders," he said, shifting the supply sack to offer his hand. She took it hesitantly, surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite the calluses that marked his palm. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Heard what happened this morning." News travels fast in a place like Lincoln. Shame flooded through her again, hot and humiliating. "Then you know what I am. I know you are a young woman in trouble who needs help," he said simply. "I know your father is a hard man who values his pride more than his own blood. And I know you are sitting here with nowhere to go." She looked away, blinking back tears. "I will figure something out, I always do." "How?" The question was not unkind, but it cut through her false bravado like a blade. "It is getting late. Where will you sleep tonight? What will you eat?" "I do not need your pity," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Zachary crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his expression serious. "I am not offering pity. I am offering a job and a place to stay. My ranch is small, but I need help with the cooking, mending, and general housekeeping. The work is honest, the pay is fair, and you would have a room of your own. No strings attached, no expectations beyond a day's work for a day's wages." Maeve studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She had been fooled by a charming man once before, and the consequences had destroyed her life. But there was something different about Zachary Xanders, something solid and trustworthy in the way he met her gaze without flinching. Still, she had to ask, "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "My mother was in a similar situation once," he said quietly. "Pregnant and alone, cast out by her family. A stranger took her in and gave her a chance to survive. She never forgot that kindness, and she taught me that we all need help sometimes. There is no shame in accepting it." The words broke something inside her, and a tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by the display of weakness. "What about the baby? What happens when I cannot work anymore, when I am too far along?" "We will figure it out when the time comes," Zachary said. "One problem at a time. Right now, the question is whether you want to come with me or take your chances here in town." She looked down the empty street, at the town that had turned its back on her, then back at this stranger who was offering her a lifeline. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself, but what choice did she really have? "All right," she whispered. "I will come with you." Relief flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. "Good. My horse can carry us both, and it is not a long ride." He stood and offered his hand again, and this time when she took it, he pulled her gently to her feet. She swayed slightly, lightheaded from stress and hunger, and his hand immediately steadied her elbow. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday evening," she admitted. He shook his head and guided her toward the general store. "Wait here a moment." He disappeared inside again and returned shortly with a wrapped sandwich and a canteen of water. "Eat this while I get my horse ready." Maeve accepted the food with trembling hands, touched by the simple kindness of the gesture. The sandwich was fresh bread with thick slices of ham and cheese, and she had to force herself to eat slowly despite her ravenous hunger. The water was cool and clean, washing away the dust that had coated her throat. By the time Zachary returned leading his horse, she felt marginally more human. He secured his supply sack to the saddle, then mounted in one smooth motion before reaching down to help her up. She had ridden before, but never behind a man on his horse, and she felt awkward as she settled onto the bay's broad back. "Hold on to me," Zachary said over his shoulder. "Do not worry about being polite. I would rather you hold tight than fall off." Hesitantly, Maeve wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the solid warmth of his body, the way his muscles shifted beneath his shirt as he gathered the reins. Then they were moving, the horse's gait smooth and easy as they left Lincoln behind. She turned to look back once, at the town where she had been born and raised, where every street corner held a memory. Then she faced forward, toward whatever future awaited her at the Xanders ranch. The ride took nearly an hour at the steady pace Zachary maintained. They traveled north across rolling prairie grassland, the landscape painted gold by the late afternoon sun. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, explaining the boundaries of his property in a conversational tone that helped ease her nervousness. He told her about the challenges of ranching in Nebraska, the harsh winters and unpredictable storms, but also about the beauty of the land, the way the sky stretched endless and open in every direction. "There," he said finally, gesturing ahead. Maeve looked past his shoulder and saw a small ranch house nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running nearby. The house was modest but well built, constructed of timber and stone with a wide front porch. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. Cottonwood trees lined the creek, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. It was simple and isolated, but there was something appealing about the quiet solitude of it. They rode down the gentle slope, and Zachary brought the horse to a halt in front of the house. He dismounted first, then helped Maeve down, his hands firm on her waist as he lifted her to the ground. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly, but he steadied her with the same patient care he had shown all afternoon. "Come inside," he said, gathering his supplies. "I will show you where everything is, and you can get settled." The interior of the house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a sturdy wooden table in the center. Simple furniture filled the space, everything practical and well-maintained. 2 doors led off the main room, and Zachary opened one to reveal a small bedroom with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the creek. "This was my mother's room," he said quietly. "She passed 2 years ago, but I have kept it ready. It is yours now for as long as you need it." Maeve stepped inside, taking in the clean quilt on the bed, the wildflowers in a vase on the dresser. Someone had cared for this space, kept it as a memorial or perhaps in hope that it would be needed again. "It is lovely," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Zachary set her small bundle of belongings on the dresser. "There is a wash basin and pitcher, and the outhouse is about 30 yards behind the house. I sleep in the other room, and I promise you that your privacy will be respected absolutely. You can bolt the door from the inside if it makes you feel safer." She turned to face him, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than her own family had in her moment of greatest need. "Why are you really doing this? There must be dozens of women who would work for you without the complications I bring." He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "I told you about my mother, and that is true, but there is more to it than that. I know what it is like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control, to have people look at you with contempt because you do not fit their narrow definition of acceptable. My mother was Mexican, you see, and my father was a white rancher who married her despite the hatred they faced from both communities. I grew up watching her endure sneers and slights from people who thought she was not good enough. So when I see someone being cast out for making a mistake, for being human, I cannot just turn away." The honesty in his words struck her deeply, and Maeve felt a connection forming, fragile but real. "I am sorry for what you and your mother suffered." "And I am sorry for what you are going through," he replied. "But you are here now, and that is what matters. You are safe here. No one will hurt you or judge you under my roof. That is a promise." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, and for the first time since her father had thrown her out, Maeve felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. "You are safe here now," she repeated softly, testing the words, wanting desperately to believe them. "Yes," Zachary said firmly. "You are." The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine that surprised Maeve with its ease. She woke each morning to the sound of Zachary moving around the main room, stoking the fire and preparing coffee before heading out to tend the cattle and horses. By the time he left, she would be up and dressed, ready to start her own work. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, mended his clothes, and tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that had grown wild in his mother's absence. The work was not easy, but it was honest and satisfying in a way that her confined life in town had never been. Here, there were no disapproving neighbors watching her every move, no whispered gossip following her down the street. There was just the work, the land, and Zachary's quiet, steady presence. He was different from any man she had ever known. He spoke little but listened carefully when she talked, asking thoughtful questions about her life, her hopes, her fears. He never pressed for details about the father of her child, never made her feel ashamed of her condition. Instead, he treated her with a respect that was both surprising and deeply touching. When she grew tired, he would insist she rest. When she struggled with a heavy task, he would take it from her hands without making her feel weak or inadequate. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together and watch the sun set over the prairie. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams for the future. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, listening to the crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Maeve found herself looking forward to those quiet hours, to the way Zachary's presence made her feel safe and valued in a way she had never experienced before. 3 weeks after her arrival, she was hanging laundry on the line when she felt the baby move for the first time. It was just a flutter, barely noticeable, but it stopped her in her tracks. She pressed her hand to her belly, tears springing to her eyes as the reality of the life growing inside her suddenly became undeniably real. This was not just an abstract problem or a source of shame anymore. This was a child, her child, and despite everything, a wave of fierce love swept through her. "Are you all right?" Zachary's voice came from behind her, concerned. She had not heard him approach. She turned, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. The baby moved. "I just felt it for the first time." His expression softened and he stepped closer. "That must be strange, frightening, and wonderful all at once." "Yes," she said with a shaky laugh. "Exactly that. I have been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that I had not really thought about what comes after. But now it feels real in a way it did not before." "You will be a good mother," Zachary said with quiet certainty. "I have seen how you care for the chickens, how you nurture the garden back to life. You have a gentle heart, Maeve Garrison. Your child will be lucky to have you." The words warmed her from the inside out, chasing away the lingering doubts and fears. "I hope you are right. I am terrified of failing, of not being enough." "We all feel that way," he said. "My father told me once that the moment he held me for the first time, he was overwhelmed by the responsibility of it, the weight of another life depending on him. But he also said it was the best moment of his life, that everything suddenly made sense in a way it never had before." She smiled at that, imagining this strong, capable man as a newborn in his father's arms. "Your parents sound like they were remarkable people." "They were," Zachary agreed. "I wish you could have known them. My mother especially. She would have liked you." The conversation lingered with Maeve for days afterward, and she found herself watching Zachary with new eyes. She noticed the way he was patient with the animals, how he worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk to keep the ranch running smoothly. She saw the kindness in his gestures, the way he would leave little things for her to find. Fresh eggs from the hen house, a bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table, a book he thought she might enjoy. She began to realize, with a mixture of wonder and fear, that she was developing feelings for him that went far beyond gratitude. It was in the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch, the way she caught herself watching him work through the window, the way his rare smiles made her feel like the sun had broken through storm clouds. But she pushed those feelings down, convinced that they were foolish and dangerous. He had given her shelter out of kindness, nothing more. To imagine there could be anything romantic between them was to risk ruining the one good thing in her life. September gave way to October, and the weather began to cool. Maeve's belly grew more prominent, and she had to let out the seams of her dresses to accommodate her changing shape. Zachary never commented on it directly, but she noticed how he became more protective, insisting she not lift heavy objects or work too long without rest. He brought her a rocking chair for her room, saying his mother had used it when she was expecting him, and Maeve would sit in it in the evenings, gently rocking and imagining what it would be like to hold her baby in her arms. One afternoon in late October, Zachary came back from town with news that made Maeve's blood run cold. "I ran into your brother Michael at the feed store," he said carefully. "He wanted to know how you were doing." Maeve set down the bread dough she had been kneading, her hands suddenly shaking. "What did you tell him?" "That you are well and working hard," Zachary replied. He seemed relieved. "He said your mother asks about you constantly, that she cries herself to sleep most nights." Pain lanced through Maeve's chest, sharp and unexpected. She had tried not to think about her family, had told herself that they had made their choice when they cast her out. But knowing that her mother was suffering, that at least one of her brothers cared enough to ask, reopened wounds she had thought were beginning to heal. Did he say anything else? She asked quietly. Zachary hesitated, then said, "He asked if you would be willing to see them. Not your father, but your mother and brothers. He said they miss you." Maeve turned away, staring out the window at the golden prairie grass swaying in the breeze. Part of her wanted to refuse, to punish them for abandoning her when she needed them most. But another part, the part that still loved them despite everything, yearned for reconciliation. "I do not know if I can," she whispered. "What if they look at me with disgust? What if they make me feel ashamed all over again?" She felt Zachary's presence behind her, close but not touching. "That is your decision to make, and I will support whatever you choose. But I will say this, carrying anger and hurt is exhausting. If there is a chance for healing, even partial healing, it might be worth taking." She turned to face him, searching his eyes. "Would you stay with me? If I agreed to see them, would you be there?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." The meeting was arranged for the following Sunday. Zachary drove Maeve into town in his wagon, and they met her mother and brothers at the small church on the edge of Lincoln. Her father was conspicuously absent, as promised, though his disapproval hung over the gathering like a shadow. Maeve's mother, Grace, broke down the moment she saw her daughter. She rushed forward and pulled Maeve into a tight embrace, sobbing apologies into her hair. "I am so sorry, my darling girl. I am so sorry I did not stand up for you. I have regretted it every single day." Maeve clung to her mother, her own tears flowing freely. "I missed you so much, Mama. I was so scared." Michael and her younger brother Thomas stood awkwardly nearby, both looking ashamed and relieved in equal measure. When Grace finally released Maeve, both brothers took turns hugging her carefully, mindful of her swollen belly. "You look well," Michael said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Better than I feared you might." "Zachary has been very kind," Maeve said, glancing at the man who stood a respectful distance away, giving them privacy but ready to intervene if needed. "He gave me a place to stay and work to do. He saved my life." Grace turned to Zachary, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter when her own family failed her. I can never repay that debt." Zachary removed his hat respectfully. "No debt is owed, madam. Maeve has earned her keep many times over. She is a hard worker and a good person." The five of them walked together along the edge of town, talking carefully about neutral topics at first, then gradually opening up about harder subjects. Grace explained that she had tried to reason with Maeve's father, but his pride and rigid sense of morality would not bend. He had forbidden any contact with Maeve, though Grace had defied him to arrange this meeting. "Will he ever forgive me?" Maeve asked quietly. Grace's expression was pained. "I do not know, sweetheart. He is a stubborn man, and he sees this as a stain on the family honor. But perhaps when the baby comes, when he sees his grandchild, his heart might soften." Maeve was not sure she believed that, but she appreciated her mother's optimism. They talked for over an hour before Grace reluctantly said they needed to return home before her father grew suspicious. There were more tears, more embraces, and promises to meet again soon. As Maeve watched her mother and brothers walk away, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at the partial reconciliation, sadness at the ongoing estrangement from her father, and gratitude that she had not lost her entire family. On the ride back to the ranch, Zachary reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "You did well today. That could not have been easy." "It was not," she admitted, "but I am glad I went. Thank you for being there." "Always," he said simply, and the word carried a weight of promise that made her heart skip. November brought the first serious cold snap, and Maeve found herself spending more time indoors, keeping the fire stoked and preparing hearty meals to sustain them through the changing season. She was 5 months along now, her pregnancy obvious to anyone who looked at her. The baby was active, especially in the evenings, and she would sometimes press her hand to her belly and feel the small feet or hands pushing back. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Zachary reading and Maeve mending a shirt, she felt a particularly strong kick. She gasped softly, and Zachary looked up immediately, concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" "Yes, the baby is just very active tonight," she said with a small laugh. "Feels like there is a wild horse in there." He set down his book, a curious expression on his face. "What does it feel like, if you do not mind me asking?" "Like fluttering, or sometimes like gentle taps from the inside," she tried to explain. This one was stronger than usual, though, more like a push. Before she could think better of it, she reached for his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving. Zachary froze, his eyes widening as he felt the distinct movement beneath his palm. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by the miracle of life growing between them, and Maeve felt something shift in the air, something profound and intimate. "That is incredible," Zachary breathed, his voice full of wonder. "I have felt foals moving in their mothers, but this is different. This is a person, a whole new life." "Yes," Maeve said softly, acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how his hand felt warm and right pressed against her. "Sometimes it is the only thing that makes all of this bearable, knowing that something good will come from everything that has happened." Zachary looked up from her belly to her face, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Maeve, I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not make things awkward between us." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I care about you," he said carefully. "Not just as someone I have helped, but as a woman I have come to deeply respect and admire. These past months, having you here, getting to know you, it has changed something in me. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to make you smile, wanting to protect you and make your life easier in any way I can." Maeve's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Zachary, I feel the same way. I have tried to convince myself it was just gratitude, but it is more than that, so much more." He lifted his hand from her belly to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I know the situation is complicated. I know you are carrying another man's child, and that adds layers of difficulty to anything between us. But I want you to know that it does not matter to me. If you would consider letting me court you properly, with the intention of building a real future together, I would be honored." "The baby," she started, but he stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. "The baby is part of you, which means the baby is part of any future we might have together. I would raise that child as my own, love them as my own if you would let me. We could be a family, Maeve. A real family built on respect and genuine affection." The words were everything she had not dared to hope for, and Maeve felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would like that very much." Zachary smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted this moment, this connection, this promise of something beautiful emerging from the ashes of her old life. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, full of promise and tenderness. The kiss deepened slowly, and Maeve felt like she was finally, truly home. They pulled apart eventually, both slightly breathless, and Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "I will court you properly, and when enough time has passed, when you are ready, I will marry you and give you and the baby my name. No one will ever make you feel ashamed again." Maeve believed him, and that belief was its own kind of miracle. Winter arrived in full force in December, blanketing the prairie in snow and confining them largely to the house and barn. Zachary worked tirelessly to keep the animals fed and safe, often coming in covered in ice and snow, his face red from the biting wind. Maeve would have hot coffee and food waiting, and he would thaw out by the fire while she fussed over him, checking his hands and ears for signs of frostbite. Their courtship progressed in the quiet, intimate way that winter enforced. They spent long evenings talking by the fire, learning everything about each other. Zachary told her about his childhood, about learning to ranch from his father while his mother taught him to read and instilled in him a love of learning. He spoke of his parents' love story, how they had faced down prejudice and hatred to build a life together, how their strength had shaped him into the man he was. Maeve shared her own stories, the good memories from before everything fell apart. She told him about her love of singing, how she used to perform in church before her scandal made that impossible. She talked about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, of traveling beyond the small world of Lincoln. And she told him about the father of her child, not because she still had feelings for that man, but because Zachary deserved to know the truth. "He was charming and I was naive," she said one snowy evening. "He told me he loved me, that he would come back for me after he finished his business in Omaha. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because my life felt so small and he represented something bigger, something exciting. I gave him everything and he took it and left without a backward glance." Zachary listened without judgment, his hand holding hers. "You were not naive. You were trusting, which is different. He was a liar and a coward who took advantage of your good heart. That is on him, not you." "Do you really mean that?" she asked. "You do not think less of me?" "Never," he said firmly. "Your past does not define you, Maeve. Your strength does. The way you kept going when everything fell apart, the way you have built a new life from nothing, that is who you are. And that is the woman I have fallen in love with." The words hung in the air between them, precious and profound. "You love me," she whispered. "Yes," Zachary said simply. "I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day when you sat on that bench looking lost and determined all at once." "You do not have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." But Maeve did not hesitate. "I love you too, Zachary Xanders. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel like I matter, like I am worth something. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Maeve felt the last walls around her heart crumble completely. She was his, and he was hers, and somehow that was enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Christmas came, and Zachary surprised her by producing a small pine tree he had cut from near the creek. They decorated it together with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Maeve crafted from old newspapers. On Christmas morning, he gave her a gift wrapped in brown paper, and when she opened it, she found a beautiful carved wooden rattle, sanded smooth and polished to a soft shine. "For the baby," he said. "I have been working on it in the evenings in the barn. I hope you like it." Maeve held the rattle, running her fingers over the intricate patterns he had carved into the wood, and tears streamed down her face. "It is perfect. You made this for my baby, for our baby. How could I not love it? Our baby," he repeated softly, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." She gave him a gift, too. A shirt she had sewn from fabric she had purchased with her small savings, embroidered with his initials on the cuff. He put it on immediately, declaring it the finest shirt he had ever owned, and they spent the rest of the day in contented companionship, cooking together and enjoying the quiet joy of the holiday. January of 1879 arrived cold and harsh, but inside the ranch house there was warmth and love. Maeve was 7 months pregnant now, moving more slowly and tiring more easily. Zachary had taken over most of the household chores, insisting she rest and conserve her strength for the birth that loomed ahead. He had arranged for the town doctor to visit when her time came, and he had stocked the house with supplies they might need. "I am scared," Maeve admitted one evening as she rocked in her chair, her hands resting on her enormous belly. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" Zachary knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know, and I will be right here with you every step of the way. You will not face this alone. Promise me," she said urgently, gripping his hands tight. "Promise me that if something happens, if you have to choose, you will save the baby. Promise me my child will have a chance at life." "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said fiercely. "I refuse to accept any other outcome. You and the baby will both come through this healthy and safe, and we will be a family. That is the only future I will consider." His certainty bolstered her own wavering courage, and she managed a shaky smile. "All right, I believe you." February brought no relief from the cold, and Maeve felt increasingly uncomfortable as she waited for labor to begin. The baby seemed to have run out of room, and every movement was visible from the outside, pressing against her stretched skin. She could not sleep well, could not find a comfortable position, and she grew impatient and anxious for it all to be over. Then, on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of February, her water broke while she was making breakfast. She gasped and grabbed the edge of the table, looking down at the puddle spreading on the floor. "Zachary," she called, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "It is time." He appeared in the doorway instantly, having heard the change in her tone. His face went pale, but his voice was steady as he said, "All right, let us get you to your room. I will ride to town and fetch the doctor." "Do not leave me," she said, fear spiking through her. I will be as fast as humanly possible, he promised. You will barely notice I am gone. Can you walk? She nodded, and he helped her to her bedroom, getting her settled on the bed with pillows propped behind her. The first real contraction hit as he was covering her with a blanket, and she cried out, gripping his hand so hard she knew she must be hurting him. But he did not pull away, just breathed with her until it passed. I have to go now, he said reluctantly. Will you be all right for an hour? Go, she said, though every fiber of her being wanted him to stay. Hurry. He was gone in a flash, and she heard the sound of his horse thundering away from the house. Then she was alone with the pain, and the fear and the inexorable process that had begun in her body. The contractions came in waves, each one stronger than the last, and she focused on breathing through them the way her mother had once described, trying not to give in to the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. Time became meaningless, measured only in the spaces between contractions. She had no idea how long Zachary had been gone when she finally heard hoofbeats returning. He burst into her room with the doctor, a gray-haired man named Dr. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Lancaster County. "How are you doing, my dear, doctor?" Patterson asked calmly, setting down his medical bag and rolling up his sleeves. "It hurts," Maeve gasped as another contraction gripped her. "It hurts so much." "That is normal," the doctor assured her. "You are doing just fine. Let me examine you and see how far along you are." Zachary stood near the door, looking helpless and worried. Maeve reached out a hand toward him. "Please stay. I need you." He came immediately, taking her hand and settling into the chair beside the bed. "I am not going anywhere. Whatever you need, I am here." The labor continued for hours, long, grueling hours that blurred together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Zachary stayed beside her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until his knuckles turned white, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, speaking soft words of encouragement even when she screamed at him that this was all too much, that she could not do it. "You are so close, doctor," Patterson said finally, somewhere around sunset. "A few more pushes and you will have your baby." Maeve was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open, but she gathered the last reserves of her strength and pushed with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times, and then suddenly there was a release of pressure and the sound of a baby crying filled the room. She collapsed back against the pillows, panting and shaking, as Dr. Patterson held up a tiny, squirming infant. "You have a son," he announced with a smile. "A healthy baby boy. A son." Maeve started to cry, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion and an instant, fierce love for this tiny person she had not even seen clearly yet. Dr. Patterson cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Maeve's arms. She looked down at her son's face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect, and felt her world shift on its axis. This was her child, her baby, and he was beautiful. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his tiny hand with her finger. His fingers closed around hers instinctively, and she sobbed with the pure emotion of it. Zachary leaned in, looking at the baby with an expression of such tenderness that Maeve fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Zachary said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect, doctor." Patterson finished attending to Maeve, making sure she was stable and comfortable, then gave Zachary instructions for the next few days. "She needs rest, lots of fluids and help with the baby. No heavy work for at least 6 weeks. I will check on her again in a few days." After the doctor left, Zachary sat beside Maeve and their son, his hand resting gently on the baby's head. "Have you thought about names?" she had during the long winter months. "Matthew," she said softly. "Maeve Garrison. It means gift of God, and that is what he is. My gift, even though I never expected him." Maeve Garrison Xanders, Zachary corrected gently. If you will let me give him my name, I want to adopt him legally to be his father in every way that matters. Fresh tears spilled down Maeve's cheeks. You would do that? I already think of him as mine, Zachary said simply. I have been preparing for his arrival for months, building him a cradle, making toys, imagining what he will be like. He is my son, Maeve, if you will let me claim him. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He will be so lucky to have you as his father. Zachary kissed her forehead gently, then pressed a soft kiss to baby Matthew's head. We are a family now, the three of us, officially. The weeks that followed were exhausting but filled with a joy Maeve had never imagined possible. Matthew was a good baby, fussy at times but generally content, and he took to nursing easily. Zachary was an attentive and involved father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Matthew when he cried, singing lullabies in a surprisingly melodic voice that never failed to soothe the baby. Maeve's mother visited frequently, bringing gifts and advice and reconciliation. Grace was completely smitten with her grandson, and the time she spent at the ranch allowed her and Maeve to rebuild their relationship. Even Michael and Thomas came by occasionally, both clearly charmed by their tiny nephew. Only Maeve's father remained absent and silent, but she found that with each passing day, his absence hurt less. She had built a new family, one based on love and acceptance rather than rigid rules and judgment. Zachary was more of a father to Matthew than her own father had ever been to her, and that was all that truly mattered. By the time spring arrived, bringing warmth and new growth to the prairie, Maeve had fully recovered from the birth. She and Zachary fell into a comfortable rhythm, sharing the work of the ranch and the care of Matthew between them. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, Matthew sleeping in Maeve's arms or in the cradle Zachary had built, and talk about their future. I want to marry you, Zachary said one evening in April as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. I know we have talked about it before, but I want to make it official. I want you to be my wife, and I want Matthew to have my name legally. Maeve looked at him, at this man who had given her everything when she had nothing, who loved her son as his own, who made her feel cherished and valued every single day. I want that too, more than anything. Then marry me, he said, getting down on one knee right there on the porch. He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring that had belonged to his mother. I know this is not fancy, and I know our circumstances are not traditional, but I love you with everything I am. Marry me, Maeve Garrison. Let me spend the rest of my life proving how much you mean to me. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her. They kissed deeply, pouring all their love and commitment into that moment, while Matthew slept peacefully beside them, unaware that his family was becoming official. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Lincoln. Maeve wore a dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored fabric Zachary had bought for her in town, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Zachary wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar. Maeve's mother and brothers attended, weeping with joy, and several of Zachary's ranch neighbors came to witness the union. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Maeve with such passion and tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed audibly. They walked back down the aisle together, Matthew held securely in Zachary's arms, a family in every sense of the word. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food prepared by neighbors who had grown to respect and admire the unusual couple. There was fiddle music and dancing, laughter and celebration. And for the first time since her father had thrown her out, Maeve felt completely at peace. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with people who loved and accepted her. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Zachary and Maeve stood together under the stars, Matthew asleep in his cradle inside the house. "Happy?" Zachary asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Maeve replied honestly. "A year ago I was at my lowest point, convinced my life was over. And now I have a beautiful son, a home I love, and a husband who treats me like I am precious. How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," Zachary insisted. "You came into my life and filled all the empty spaces I did not even know were there. You made this house a home again. You gave me a family. That is the greatest gift I have ever received." They went inside together, checking on Matthew before retiring to their room, which they now shared as husband and wife. Their physical relationship progressed slowly and carefully, with Zachary always mindful of her comfort and boundaries. He made love to her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, showing her that intimacy could be beautiful and mutual when shared between people who truly loved each other. The summer of 1879 was one of the happiest times of Maeve's life. The ranch prospered, with healthy cattle and good grass. Matthew grew rapidly, becoming more alert and interactive, smiling at his parents and making adorable gurgling sounds that delighted them both. Zachary taught Maeve to ride properly, and they would take short trips around the property with Matthew secured in a sling against Maeve's chest, showing him the land that would one day be part of his heritage. In August, Maeve received an unexpected visitor. She was hanging laundry when she saw a lone figure approaching on foot from the direction of town. As the person drew closer, she realized with a jolt of shock that it was her father. She had not seen him or spoken to him since the day he threw her out, over a year ago. Isaac Garrison looked older than she remembered, his hair grayer, his face more lined. He stopped several feet away, his hat in his hands, his expression uncertain. "Maeve," he said, his voice rough. "I hope I am not intruding." She stood frozen, unsure how to react. Part of her wanted to send him away, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain and rejection he had inflicted on her. But another part, the part that still remembered being his little girl, wanted to give him a chance. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I want to apologize," he said simply. "I was wrong, Maeve. Wrong to throw you out, wrong to refuse to see you or help you when you needed your family most. Your mother has told me everything, how you have built a good life here, how your husband is a decent man, how my grandson is healthy and happy. I let my pride and my anger blind me to what was truly important, and I have regretted it every day since." Maeve felt tears prick her eyes, but she held them back. "You hurt me deeply, Papa. You made me feel worthless and ashamed when I needed you most." "I know," he said, his own eyes glistening, "and I cannot undo that. But I am hoping you might find it in your heart to forgive me, to let me be part of your life again. I want to know my grandson. I want to watch him grow up, and I want my daughter back." Before she could respond, Zachary came around the corner of the house, carrying Matthew. He sized up the situation immediately, his protective instincts engaging. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, positioning himself beside Maeve. "This is my father," Maeve said quietly. "Isaac Garrison. Papa, this is my husband, Zachary Xanders, and our son Matthew." Isaac looked at the baby, and his stern expression crumbled completely. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Matthew. Maeve looked at Zachary, who gave her a small nod, leaving the decision to her. She thought about it for a long moment, then said, "Yes, you may hold him." Zachary carefully transferred Matthew into Isaac's arms, and Maeve watched as her father gazed down at his grandson for the first time. Tears streamed openly down Isaac's weathered cheeks, and his hands trembled as he held the baby. "He is beautiful," Isaac whispered. "He has your eyes, Maeve. Your mother's eyes. He has a good heart, too," Maeve said, "because he has a father who loves him unconditionally and teaches him what it means to be a good man." Isaac looked up at Zachary with respect and perhaps a touch of envy. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter and grandson when I failed them. I can see that you love them deeply." "They are my whole world," Zachary said simply. Isaac returned Matthew to Zachary's arms, then turned back to Maeve. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am asking for it anyway. I cannot change the past, but I would like to be part of your future, if you will let me." Maeve thought about all the pain and rejection she had endured, but she also thought about the new life she had built, the love and acceptance she had found. She was not the same scared, broken girl her father had cast out. She was stronger now, more confident, and that strength allowed her to extend grace even to someone who had hurt her so deeply. "You can be part of our lives," she said finally, "but you need to understand that Zachary is Matthew's father in every way that matters. This is our family, and we make the decisions about how we live and raise our child. If you can accept that and treat us with respect, then you are welcome here." "I understand," Isaac said humbly, "and I accept your conditions completely. Thank you, Maeve. Thank you for being more generous than I deserve." The reconciliation with her father was not perfect or instant, but it was real. Isaac began visiting regularly, building a relationship with Matthew and slowly repairing his connection with Maeve. He never quite acknowledged that he had been wrong about everything, but his actions spoke louder than words. He helped Zachary with projects around the ranch, brought gifts for Matthew, and treated Maeve with a respect he had never shown when she lived under his roof. Autumn arrived again, bringing the anniversary of Maeve's arrival at the ranch. On the exact day, Zachary surprised her by taking her to the spot where he had first seen her sitting on that bench in town. "Do you remember?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. "How could I forget?" she replied. "I was terrified and alone, convinced my life was over." "And now?" he prompted. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and given her a family. "Now I am exactly where I am meant to be, with you, with Matthew, living a life I never imagined could be mine." "You were right that day, Zachary. I am safe here, safe and loved and home." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, right there on the street where their story had begun. People walking by smiled and shook their heads at the display, but neither Maeve nor Zachary cared. They had found each other against all odds, and that was worth celebrating. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and Zachary's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew. Matthew thrived, growing into a happy, confident child who adored his parents and loved life on the prairie. When he was 3 years old, Maeve became pregnant again, this time under very different circumstances than her first pregnancy. "I hope it is a girl," Zachary said one evening, his hand resting on her growing belly. "A little sister for Matthew." "You do not mind that Matthew is not biologically yours?" Maeve asked, a question that sometimes still nagged at her despite all evidence to the contrary. "He is mine in every way that matters," Zachary said firmly. "I was there when he was born. I was the first one to hold him after you. I am the one he calls Papa. Biology is just one small part of what makes a father. Love is what matters, and I love that boy with everything I have." Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, and they named her Grace, after Maeve's mother. She had Zachary's dark hair and Maeve's green eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. Matthew was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with the baby, and the sight of her two children together filled Maeve with a happiness so profound it sometimes brought her to tears. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and crops that failed. There were moments of doubt and fear, times when money was tight and the future seemed uncertain. But through it all, Maeve and Zachary faced everything together, their love and commitment never wavering. Maeve's father passed away when Matthew was 7 and Grace was 4. Despite their complicated history, Maeve mourned him, grateful that they had reconciled before the end. Her mother lived for many more years, spending much of her time at the ranch, doting on her grandchildren and helping Maeve with the household work. As the years passed, the ranch grew and prospered. Matthew showed an early aptitude for ranching, learning everything he could from Zachary about cattle and horses and working the land. Grace was more interested in books and learning, and Zachary made sure she had access to education, determined that his daughter would have every opportunity to develop her mind. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Maeve and Zachary stood on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Matthew and Grace were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Zachary pulled Maeve close and she leaned into his embrace, feeling utterly content. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If you had not been in town that day, if you had ridden past without stopping." "I try not to," Zachary admitted. "Because the thought of a world where I do not have you and our children is unbearable. You are my everything, Maeve. You always have been. From that first moment I saw you sitting on that bench looking lost and determined. I was so scared," she remembered. "So certain that my life was over, that I would never be happy again. And instead, you found a new life, better than the old one ever was," Zachary said. "We found each other and we built something beautiful together." "We did," she agreed, watching their children play. Matthew was teaching Grace to throw a rope, and she was giggling at her own clumsy attempts. "We really did." Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and love. Matthew grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the ranch work as Zachary aged. He married a kind young woman from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Maeve and Zachary 3 grandchildren to spoil and love. Grace became a teacher, educating children in Lincoln, and never forgetting the values her parents had instilled in her about kindness, acceptance, and the importance of second chances. Maeve's mother passed peacefully in her sleep when she was 72, having lived long enough to see her grandchildren grown and happy. Michael and Thomas remained close with Maeve and her family throughout their lives, the bonds between them strengthened by the trials they had weathered together. As Maeve and Zachary grew older, they spent more time reminiscing about their journey together, the unlikely circumstances that had brought them into each other's lives. They never forgot that day in 1878 when everything changed, when a desperate young woman and a compassionate cowboy took a chance on each other. "You have any regrets?" Maeve asked Zachary one evening when they were both in their 60s, sitting on the same porch where they had spent so many hours of their lives. He thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every decision I made led me to you, to our family, to this life we have built." "How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same way," she said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "Even the hard parts, even the pain and the fear, it all brought me here. To you, to this life. I would not change a thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the prairie they had called home for so many decades. The land had changed over the years, with new settlements springing up, and the wild frontier gradually giving way to civilization. But the ranch remained, a testament to their hard work and dedication, a legacy for their children and grandchildren. When Zachary passed away at the age of 74, Maeve mourned him deeply, but found comfort in the knowledge that they had lived a full and beautiful life together. She remained on the ranch for several more years, supported by Matthew and his family, until her own health began to fail. In her final days, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, she reflected on the extraordinary journey her life had been. She thought about that terrified 19-year-old girl who had been cast out by her family, pregnant, and alone with nowhere to go. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped his horse and offered her a lifeline, not because he had to, but because he believed everyone deserved kindness and a second chance. And she thought about the love that had grown between them, slow and steady and strong, the foundation upon which they had built an entire life. "You were right, Zachary," she whispered to the memory of her husband on the day before she passed. "I was safe there, safe with you always." Maeve Xanders passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, surrounded by the family she and Zachary had created together. She was buried next to her husband on the ranch they had built, under the vast Nebraska sky that had witnessed their entire love story. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who carried their values of kindness, acceptance, and unconditional love into the future. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, and the story of Maeve and Zachary became a cherished family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about second chances and unexpected love, about the power of compassion to transform lives, and about the beautiful family that can be built when two people choose to love each other despite every obstacle in their path. And at the heart of it all was that single moment in 1878 when a desperate young woman and a kind-hearted cowboy took a chance on each other, and in doing so, created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and nurtured through decades of devotion, proving that sometimes the most beautiful futures emerge from the darkest beginnings, and that home is not a place, but the people who make you feel safe, loved, and cherished exactly as you are.